Lovely people of Convergence, please welcome Reverend Matt's Monster Science!
Thank you so much. Thank you. Listen, I'm a performer, and the reason I'm a performer, the reason anyone is a performer, is in order to get applause. So, if you applaud here at the beginning, I'm done. I can just go, but you didn't know, so I'll go ahead. Yeah, so everything's good. Thank you. Hi, I'm Reverend Matt, and welcome to the Monstrolympics. For those of you who are here for the very finest in Olympics or Olympic satire content, well, buckle up, my friends, because there won't be any. So, maybe unbuckle yourself, I guess. No, the Olympics are simply a thin framework to look at things from a global perspective, to determine the best of the best in monsterdom according to a variety of categories. We will be looking at monsterdom from all around the world, best Kaiju, best vampire, 23 categories in all. That's not the funny part, but great. These are, of course, the best according to me, one of the upper Midwest top 10 monster-based comedians. I have put numberless man-hours into the study of monsters in all their forms throughout the world, so much so as to render me unemployable. If you listen closely, you can even hear from here my mother weeping. But these are just my opinions. You, of course, have a right to your own opinions until the Supreme Court takes it away later this year. It'll always be too soon. So, let's begin, won't we? Our first category is Best Animal Person. Cultures worldwide and throughout history have invented animal-human hybrids, and once upon a time, this would have been the point in my show where I would take a pot shot at furries, but I have moved past that. Furries are quite genuinely not hurting anything. I mean, like many nerds my own age, my own sexual awakening was at least partially tied to the movie Labyrinth, and to Jennifer Connelly in my case, and to David Bowie for reasons pictured here in very many other cases. But there are a lot of characters in Labyrinth. Fantasy-wise, take your pick. I did not check the internet to see whether there was a lot of sexualization of Ludo, but of course there is. Because it's the internet, and being myself huge, hairy, and slow-witted, I do support this. But the best beast person is this. The Lion Man of Hohenstein-Stadel. That's in Germany, by the way. The German language is angry, and it wants you to be angry too. The Lion Man is 35 to 40,000 years old, carved out of ivory, and it is considered by some scholars to be the oldest known example of figurative art, which is to say art that represents something. And what it represents is a human with a lion's head. An imaginary creature, maybe literally the first thing humans ever illustrated, so far as we know. And that is amazing. Unfortunately, due to its extreme antiquity, nothing is really known about it or its connection to the Sword of Omens. Indeed, there is in fact some debate as to whether the female is intended to be male or female. Because first things first, mysterious lion-headed figure that represents the beginning of humans depicting things, are you M or F? The genital area is worn off and no longer identifiable, and tell me about it, right, fellas? And the head has no mane, which is taken by many to indicate a lioness, but it is also true that male European lions didn't have manes either, and probably this is all about men, don't you think? I mean, it's a thing that exists. I'm kidding. Also too soon, yes. By the way, if you are at all concerned that we're starting a celebration of global monsters in Germany, I salute that, but please don't be concerned. The Lion Man was found in what is now Germany, but it would be very unreasonable to call it German culture. 35,000 years ago, nobody had even thought of Nazism or Oompa bands. And furthermore, the gene that produces pale, fair skin didn't arrive in Europe until about 7,000 or 8,000 years ago. And you need that for Nazism. And for Oompa bands. Our next category is the world's best. Yes, that is actually true. Our next category is the world's best. It evolved. It appears to have first appeared in Asia 22 to 24,000 years ago and then came over. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself, or rather, talking about something I wasn't going to. Our next category is the world's best centaur. Now, centaurs. We all know what a centaur is. It's a horse, only instead of a head and neck, it has the torso, arms, and head of a man. In this case, Tim Tebow. That's John Elway on his back. Actually, I've been told that maybe I'm wrong about those identities. I can't remember how. So if you know differently and also care, then you are a very different person from me. But please let me know after the show. But actual centaurs are not the best of the world's centaurs. No, that honor goes to the Gertublilu, which are a very monster manual sort of thing. But in fact, these were invented by the ancient Mesopotamians, who did give them little human feet, but we are absolutely going to ignore that. Scorpion centaurs. The first of these were born when the primordial dragon Tiamat made war against the gods, and as part of that birthed monsters to do battle with the gods. Then later a whole bunch of them guarded the gates to the underworld, and still later they played a guitar solo on a mountaintop. There need to be 20 movies about these. I know Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson was in one of these one time, but that movie sucked and we need to try again. It would heal America. For our next category, well, all over the world, there are stories of mysterious supernatural neighbors, humanoid beings that live beside us but very apart from us, invisibly or in a parallel world, and possessed of societies and individual variation, but who are very supernatural and inscrutable nonetheless. The Europeans have the fairies or the fae, the Arabians have the jinns, the Chinese Shen, Hawaiian Menehune, and on and on. And the best kind of these, I'm here to tell you, would be the Japanese Tengu. Yeah, see, I'm just pandering now. Tengu were birdmen, or they started off that way, and later they would become winged dudes with noses that I don't really want to talk about because they make me uncomfortable. And they're quite often depicted as being dressed like Shinto mountain priests called Yamabushi. And one of the favorite pastimes of the Tengu is to harass and bedevil hypocritical priests that preach one thing and practice another. It's an amazing thing for a mythological creature to do, though obviously of no use in the modern world, where religious hypocrisy is a distant and fading memory. Thank heaven. Sometimes, in some stories, the red kind of human-faced Tengu would be the bosses of the bird Tengu. In these cases, the human Tengu would be called Dai Tengu, meaning big Tengu, and the bird one's Ko Tengu, meaning small Tengu. The bird Tengu are also sometimes called the Karasu Tengu, which is normally translated as meaning crow Tengu, though it is worth noting that in the old art, the bird Tengu look like hawks, and not at all like crows 100% of the time. So it goes. Tengu can fly and teleport and also ride on boars. Yeah, I knew there'd be a lot of appreciation for that. In fact, their magical repertoire is fairly limitless. They can shapeshift, grant wishes, turn invisible, possess humans, and make them dance, which is the best thing to do when you possess people, as American culture has itself affirmed by means of the movie Beetlejuice. Tengu were also master swordsmen and much sought after as teachers of swordsmanship. They aren't that crazy about humans, though, and rarely consent to this, and it was sometimes said that when they did consent to teaching us swordsmanship, it was essentially in order to produce more humans capable of killing other humans. Cold. I mean, a lot of supernatural creatures hate humans, and why wouldn't they? If you were literally anything on Earth besides a human, we are a nightmare. But it is a testament to the cleverness and wisdom of the Tengus that they adopt the tactic of just giving us enough rope. With all these powers, they mostly keep to themselves, though they occasionally cause trouble as well. There are specific words for their activities. Tengu doshi is when they knock over trees. Tengu warai is when they laugh really loud in the forest. And I suppose if I were out in the forest and I heard some loud laughing coming out of nowhere, it might be reassuring to have a word for it, yes. Tengu tsubute, meaning Tengu gravel, was when they threw enormous boulders at you from out of nowhere. So that was an explanation for when that happened. Basically, maybe leave the Tengu alone is the point. Related to the fairy-type people in world mythology are the creatures that we'll call ogres, powerful humanoids that like to kill us and eat us because we are so delicious. And the best of these is the Ngojama from southeastern Tengu. That is not That's wrong. Okay. Well, one of my slides is gone, but I'll describe it to you. The Ngojama from southeastern Tengu, which is a type of hairy wild man that will kill you with the iron claw in its palm, and then eat you and drink your blood. Rad. One story tells of a man who found a Ngojama and civilized it, taught it to make fire and cook its food, and in return, the Ngojama killed him with its claw. This is a story with a moral that we see all around the world. It is so important to never be nice to anyone ever. Our next category is Best Player Character Species. Of course, we all know about elves and dwarves and so on, and these are pictured here, and these are all just great, but if we're honest, they come from folklore in which their predecessors don't really hang out with us, much less team up with us to kill other creatures and steal their stuff. Even fully benevolent, inhuman entities in folklore visit us rarely. They are not an allied people. But there is one exception, the Hindu Vanara. This is a whole species of monkey people that joins the great hero Rama in his quest to free his beloved Sita from Ravana, the ruler of the Rakshasas, and there are fiery chariots and flying super weapons, and everything is amazing, including the Vanaras themselves, who are monkey people, which is also amazing. They are immune to all weapon damage, though, so talk to your DM before you play one. Next up, Best Cosmic Horror. Now, I'm a terribly big fan of Lovecraft's monsters, his incomprehensible nightmares from the depths of space. But remarkably, this award goes to the Aztecs because they believed that the stars at night were luminescent creatures hanging still in the sky far away. They were called the Tsitsimime, and they were skeletal female horrors. That the picture also didn't show up for, but they were skeletal female horrors, and they were allied with Koyol Zhaokui, the goddess of the moon, as well as Itzpapalotl, the skeletal destruction goddess with butterfly wings and with flint sacrificial knives. And the Aztecs themselves may seem hardcore to us, but they lived in the scariest universe ever imagined. The stars themselves were demons that wanted to kill the sun. When there was an eclipse, you could see the stars around it trying to destroy the sun. And the day would one day come when the sun wouldn't get enough blood from sacrifices, and the Tsitsimime would finally overcome it, and so too would they then descend upon the earth and kill us all. This was the future. It was said that they would be reminiscent of spiders, descending as if on a web, slowly and upside down. So anyway, I understand you have some problems. Dialing it down just a notch, we come to the best conventional invading alien, and here we go to the source. H.G. Wells' most famous story, the 1898 novel, The War of the Worlds. flashes of light are seen on Mars, and then huge metal cylinders crash into England west of London, and huge mechanical tripods rise from them and march east, scattering humanity in their wake and collecting some specimens of us. Their operators, the octopod Martians, feed by taking our blood. I don't know. Many of my things have disappeared, my friends. I'm very sorry. They're octopus-type creatures feed by taking our blood and injecting it directly into their own cardiovascular systems. The narrative consists mostly of the first-person protagonist observing all of this and wandering the ruins as human society falls entirely apart. In the end, famously, the Martians are defeated, not by any human agency whatsoever, but by ordinary Earth disease. And War of the Worlds invented many things besides the modern alien invasion story. The Martians attack with heat rays, reminiscent of the lasers, which would become the only way to ever hurt anyone in science fiction. So essential to weaponry that they would make swords out of them, in defiance of all of how lasers work. The Martians attack in tripods, walking machines presaging the AT-ATs, and if War of the Worlds did nothing for us, it at least paved the way for the AT-ATs, and the AT-ATs are the best. Fact. Wells' Martians invaded because their world was out of resources, and they themselves were little more than huge heads with an array of tentacles, nothing more than brain and hands. This, to Wells, was the direction that humanity was heading. Our own evolution was heading to the entirely cerebral plus the retention of manipulators. He wrote a whole essay to this effect elsewhere, in which he also mentioned that we would modify our bodies intentionally, a prediction of what is now called transhumanism, which is yet to come to pass, but if it does, in my lifetime, I would like to look like this, please. And Wells also mentions that we would become progressively worse at holding our liquor, which is maybe something that I would not feel like including in my essay on human evolution, but some people just have different concerns from mine. The Martians are even entirely dependent and possibly in mental control of their machinery. They even presage cyborgs, and hence RoboCop, who is part man, part machine, all, I forget, something cool. Actually, not something cool at all. The narrator of this book goes so far as to refer to the tripods as Martians themselves, the brain and the giant metal body being one, especially with the basic Martian being little more than a brain. And so the Martians are future humanity, weak but huge-brained, which of course became a standard template for aliens ever since. Most hostile in the same manner as these first entities from the planet named for the god of war, appealing especially to the American anti-intellectual streak. No, seriously. There's an American anti-intellectual streak. But sometimes less hostile, such as when they have a little jazz combo. Wells' Martians, no, it's not. Wells' Martians have rarely been copied directly, though they have been depicted by such luminaries as Ray Harryhausen and Edward Gorey. And there's a whole Gorey illustrated edition of the War of the Worlds, and if you need to stop listening to me now so you can find it online for purchase, then I understand. Next category is Daikaiju, the genre of enormous city-threatening monsters, often called kaiju, though this is in fact a Japanese word meaning simply unusual animal, because they have a word for that, because Japanese is the best language. In fact, the cinematic colossi are more formally called Daikaiju, with the dai prefix meaning giant. So, when you're on a first date and the conversation drifts to kaiju, inevitably, remember to correct your date that it should in fact be Daikaiju. And then, well, just remember to use protection. And for Daikaiju, there is of course only one choice. In 1945, a new unbelievably powerful destructive force entered into the world, an almost elemental force, far too difficult for the human mind, far too terrible for the human mind to wrap itself around. And it entered the world in Japan. And as humanity has so often done with terrifying elemental forces, the victims of said force created a monster to represent it. That monster was Ebirah the giant lobster. Or no, that monster was Godzilla. Now, Of course, Godzilla was the atomic bomb. Everybody knows that Godzilla is the atomic bomb. Japan did not invent the idea of symbolizing the A-bomb with monsters. A few years prior to the first Godzilla film, there was, for example, Them, a film about the ones that aren't us. Honestly, the title is a Hemingway-esque economy of writing, paranoid xenophobia distilled to its essence. Less Hemingway-esque is that it's a film about giant ants, but again, the symbolism for the bomb is excellent. Something tiny is made into something huge and terrifying. And so it went with atomic monsters for a while until Japan got involved, whereupon the monster got much, much bigger than the previous ones, towering over Tokyo. And as to why the post-Hiroshima and Nagasaki Japanese would have made their bomb monster so much huger than other people's, please feel free to think about it for 3 seconds. Remarkably, the bomb did not make Godzilla gigantic, at least not in the 1954 version. In those days, dinosaurs were just maybe that big. But he had certainly been awakened by the bomb and had other associations as well. They may have thought that 50-meter theropods were maybe a thing in those days, but nobody believed that actual dinosaurs had atomic fire breath. Well, probably somebody did, but if there's one thing we know in 2024 is that there is literally no statement you can make that nobody out there isn't believing it. Also, more horrifyingly, Godzilla's notable and unusual skin texture resembles radiation burns. Godzilla was not as campy as he is currently thought to be in those days, which we will discuss more in a moment. That's foreshadowing, leaving the audience wanting more. He's not just the A-bomb, though. He leaves Tokyo in flames in the first film, an obvious callback to the US military having done the same. And the movie opens with the sound of his enormous footsteps, thoom, thoom, which is said to be a direct sound design reference to the rhythmic sound of the bombing of Tokyo. Not hilarious. For one of Japan's first forays into the science fiction genre, which they, of course, have since lost interest in. Oh, nope, there was a slide for that, and it's gone too. It's weird. They came out swinging. Gojira is an excellent film, moody and dark and even scary. At one point, Godzilla is destroying Tokyo, and as he is doing so, we see a mother clutching her child, crying and telling the child that they will go to be with daddy soon, presumably killed in the war. So as mentioned, not really campy in the usual sense. True, the special effects aren't terrific, but neither are the special effects in your Godzilla film, so you can shut up. But this is a movie about the atomic bomb, about which the Japanese knew, and it was handled with power and gravitas. The theme song for a later American version of Godzilla, the one that gave us Godzuki, and hence can fall into an open sewer and die, starts with the phrase "up from the depths," and therefore this cartoon's single contribution to human history is the opportunity for me to segue to the next category: merpeople, people who are half human, half fish. Some of you who saw a talk that I did very, very shortly ago will have heard this before. It'll be even better the second time. The best of the merpeople is the amphibian man from The Shape of Water. Now, Guillermo del Toro, who, as you can see here, is my best friend. Thank you. It is nice to have friends. Thank you very much. Is the greatest living creator of monsters, and as such, the only director whose entire filmography I own. And then, of course, a couple of years ago, he came to Minneapolis for a weekend for the opening of an exhibit dedicated to him at the Minneapolis Institute of Art, which I will not call Mia because I'm a grown-ass man. During his brief stay, he did a book signing, which of course I attended. I gave him my book, told him how great he was, and said that I was doing a presentation about him there at the museum the following month as part of my show, Reverend Matt's Monster Science. He said, "Oh, do you talk about makeup and special effects and all that sort of thing?" "Sometimes," I said, "but it's really about monsters in general. I talk about mythical monsters and dinosaurs and Godzilla and so on." And Guillermo del Toro said to me, "Oh, you're my kind of guy." And I raised about 3 feet up the ground and began to emit a sort of warm glow. I felt like I'd been knighted. A little later, the film of his that came out, that was the first one to come out after this encounter, would win a number of Academy Awards, and my social media would light up with congratulations aimed at me personally. And it made sense. If I hadn't been knighted, it was my king who had been glorified. These accolades were, of course, for The Shape of Water, which would turn out to be my favorite Del Toro film, and hence one of my very favorite films in the world. The amphibian man is glorious, and all the more so because here we are at last entirely and unabashedly on the monster's side in Del Toro's oeuvre. Like all great monster creators and enthusiasts, Del Toro is always on the monster's side, and while of course it is understood that monsters must often be villains, indeed this is part of their allure, it is delightful to have a story where the love for them is whole and open. And if you don't want to be on the side of the monster, well, I'm sure you also have some good qualities. Actually, I'm not sure about that at all. This film is a glorious romance film. Del Toro originally conceived the idea while in talks to remake The Creature from the Black Lagoon. Raise your hands in the air and wave them in a manner indicating apathy. In which he wanted the monster and the girl to get together and live happily ever after. Universal instead decided to make a mummy movie, which nobody ever cared about and nobody ever will. And Del Toro gave us a romance grander than Universal ever would have allowed, down to the heroine being an orphan found on the side of the river with gill-like marks on her neck, a lost princess of an underwater realm, and no mistake. More specifically, it's a Beauty and the Beast story, albeit one that upends that story at every turn. The Beast is conspicuously gorgeous, and the Beauty, while also gorgeous, is unconventionally so. And more than that, she saves him, not through her purity or virtue, but through her planning and agency. The traditional Beauty and the Beast story has the weight and power of myth, but it is also about how men are brutal and bestial, and women are pure and virtuous, and all of that can get right on out of here. How wonderful to have the story retold without it. The winner of the general sea monster event is the New Zealand taniwha, enormous, intelligent, magical lizards. Taniwha are remarkably complex. Sometimes they are ravening monsters, sometimes protectors of the people who communicate with their chosen via mediums. Humans could sometimes become taniwhas after they died, or give birth to taniwhas, or marry them, or play video games in the taniwhas' basements with them. The taniwhas were up for whatever. They could be placated with offerings and were especially fond of green twigs and sweet potatoes, which is awfully reasonable of them. The winner among land-dwelling giant animals is the Norse Fenrir, a child of Loki and the goddess Angerboda. Shortly after he was born, the gods brought this giant wolf to Asgard and raised him there themselves, and none of the old stories tell us exactly why. And indeed, once they got Fenrir to Asgard, everybody was afraid of him, with only the god Tyr courageous enough to feed him. And Fenrir, of course, ate prodigiously, growing larger and larger every day, and so the gods were all like, wait, why did we even do this in the first place? And then they sort of shifted from foot to foot and avoided eye contact with each other. But eventually, someone hatched a plan. The gods constructed a fetter, a dog chain for Fenrir, and this fetter was named Lading. My dog's chain is named Stephen. They brought it to the wolf and suggested that it might be a fun game for them to put it on him, and then he could try to break out of it. Well, that did sound like a lot of fun, and not at all suspicious. And moreover, Fenrir did know his own strength and judged the fetter, Lading was its name, to be no threat to him, so he let them fasten it to him, and he kicked it off immediately. And yes, it had been a lot of fun. So the Aesir made a second fetter, twice as strong, named Dromi. Fenrir was more reluctant to play their game this time, as it was clearly a much stronger fetter, but they told him he would achieve great fame if he were to overcome it, and this of course worked, because if there's one thing wolves want, it is to be famous. You go to any bus station in Hollywood and you'll see the freshly arrived, bright-eyed ingenue wolves. So again, Fenrir allowed himself to be chained, and this time he had to strain against the fetter mightily. But once again he prevailed, sending pieces of it flying off into the distance. Well, obviously the gods had a problem, so they went down to Svartalfheim and commissioned the Svartalfar, the dwarves, to make a really top-notch fetter. And so they fashioned Gleipnir, which appeared to be a mere ribbon, but was the strongest fetter ever created. And then the gods brought Fenrir to the island Lyngvi in the lake Amsvartnir, and they challenged him again. Well, Fenrir wasn't going for it this time, reasoning that he would gain no fame from breaking a ribbon, and moreover, that having the third fetter look so weak and frail was maybe a trick of some kind. Norse mythology, where the wolves are smarter than the gods. Well, the gods started telling him that he would look like a coward if he refused, and he may have been smart, but he was still a bit of a bro, so he consented on one condition: that one of the gods put their hand in his mouth as a pledge that Fenrir would be set free after the little game. After a couple of rounds between the gods of "no, you do it," the god Tyr put his hand in Fenrir's mouth. The fetter was secured, the wolf realized he was unable to break it, and no move was made, though it had been promised, to free him. And he had been betrayed, and that about wrapped it up for Tyr's right hand. Nevertheless, the gods tied Gleipnir, the fetter, to a cord named Gelgja, tied it around a stone slab named Gjol, and anchored it to the ground with a rock named Thviti. And are you kidding me right now? For all this, Fenrir still rushed at them mouth wide, and so they stuck a sword in his mouth, pommel in the lower jaw, and point at the upper, bracing it open. And this then was the fate of Fenrir, tied by a ribbon to a rock on an island where everything had a name except the sword holding his mouth open. The Aesir, no doubt, felt pretty great about this and probably went home and had a nice celebratory dinner, picking their teeth with toothpicks named Tiffany and Lauren. Well, funny on them, because tricking an impossibly powerful god wolf into getting chained up and then leaving it there alive for eternity turned out to have a downside. At Ragnarok, all fetters are broken, including Fenrir's seemingly unbreakable one. He tears forth in fury, and understandably so. Out of all the monsters who surge forth at Ragnarok to kill the gods, Fenrir is the one who has a reason. His upper jaw is touching the sky, his lower touching the earth, flames coming from his eyes and nostrils, and he meets Odin himself in battle. And the battle is obviously a mighty one, and Odin obviously fights valiantly, but in the end, it is for naught. In the end, the All-Father is swallowed by the wolf. Then Odin's son Vidar engages Fenrir, putting one foot on the lower jaw and taking hold of his upper, tearing him apart and killing him, much as King Kong does with a Tyrannosaurus in the original movie. And since Ragnarok occurs in the future, that means Vidar got the idea from King Kong. My favorite dragon gets the prize because of my love for a single specific piece of art, actually. And this is the dragon called Mushusu, depicted most famously here on the Ishtar Gate, and less famously here on a figurine where it seems to have a very naturalistically rendered lion's body, a long neck, and then what appears to be the head of an actual Allosaurus. And all of this is just the best. It looks like an animal, but absolutely is not, and I just love it so much. The Mushusu, by the way, was another one of the many offspring of the primordial chaos dragon Tiamat, sent to try and fail to kill the god Marduk, who wanted to bring order to the universe. Truly, Tiamat was a master of weaponized childbirth. The winner for Chimera, the very global archetype of an animal made up of the parts of other animals, is a tie. One is that old classic, the griffin. This is a griffin, of course. Griffins were first depicted in Egypt and Iran at least 5,000 years ago, and the image of the griffin has survived almost entirely unchanged to the present day. The only real change is that long about the 12th century, they started replacing the lion's forelegs that it had with eagle talons, because they were cheaper, I believe. But that's it, that's all. Otherwise, it's been very consistent, which is actually very remarkable for a mythical creature. We have discussed the dragons of European antiquity. Unicorns started off as savage beasts of the wild, violent and dangerous, and now, of course, this. Also great, just different. The first appearances of griffins around 3000 BCE were in ancient Egypt and Iran, the latter among a culture called the Proto-Elamites. They wanted to be Elamites, but they knew they weren't ready, and I respect that. All we know about the griffins at this time was that they were an artistic motif. It is quite possible that they told stories of some sort about their griffins, but any oral tradition has long since faded, any writings have been destroyed, and any digital media was on 5 1/4-inch floppy disks. All of this lost to us. It wasn't until the ancient Greeks that we have any surviving writing about griffins. The first Greek writer known to have discussed griffins was Aristeas, working in the 7th century BC, though he is sometimes credited for works from over a 250-year span, because the ancient Greeks took very good care of themselves. You've seen the statues, those guys were cut. Aristeas said that far off to the north there were griffins that made their nests out of gold, and for their trouble they were constantly raided by a people called the Arimaspians. Of the Arimaspians, little is recorded. They were mad for gold, like Yukon Cornelius, and they had one eye. A piece, not to pass around. Much later, in Goethe's play Faust, the Arimaspians appear again, now trying to steal gold from giant ants. So the only thing they love as much as gold appears to be stealing it from bizarro monsters. The earliest surviving repetition of Aristeas' story was made by Herodotus, the father of history, in the 5th century BCE. But he declared that he did not find the story to be a credible one because, and I'm not making this up, one-eyed people aren't real. Majestic lion-eagle hybrids don't defend their solid gold nests from one-eyed guys. That is insane. Now, the griffin was never really regarded as a supernatural creature, or at least no more supernatural than any other creature. They told stories about all of them. The only reason why wild animals existed in a certain genre of medieval bestiary was to provide Christian moral instruction. The panther, according to at least one source, was an animal that would wake up in the morning and emit an enormous belch, which was so sweetly aromatic that it would attract all the animals in its area to its presence. This, of course, represented the sweet words of Christ. I don't know where to even begin with that. People fell for all this because people were just super into falling for things in those days, and frankly, who are we to judge? But this didn't last forever. As early as the 13th century, St. Albert of Cologne, the best smelling of the saints, realized that pretty much zero griffin accounts in all of history had been written firsthand. But it wasn't until the 17th century that the real skepticism set in. Sir Thomas Browne, in his catchily named Pseudodoxia Epidemica, doubted the existence of griffins based on there being obvious hybrids. He believed in hybrid animals, such as bats being bird-rodent hybrids, you know, but remarked that all of these were smoothly blended together rather than piecemeal in the manner of griffins. Alexander Ross, later on, didn't care about this and cited other hybrids as evidence of the griffin's existence, such as the giraffe, which was plainly a camel, hart, buffalo, leopard hybrid, as we know. He also found Griffin's gold collection to be evidence of their reality because magpies like shiny things. Checkmate. Tied with the griffin for the Chimera Prize is the Wasgo, known to the Haida people of the Pacific Northwest. And this was a wolf-orca hybrid with 3 dorsal fins for some reason. And that's all we've got about it. But what do you want, a story? Wolf-orca hybrid. As the griffin was the mightiest of creatures of land and sky, the Wasgo was the mightiest of creatures of land and sea. The Tlingit people specifically knew it as the Gonakodet, and they actually do have a story. One time a young man caught one of these while fishing and found that when he wore its skin, he would transform into a whale wolf himself. So, you know, bring this to me immediately. Though I make gentle sport about the lack of stories, you have noticed perhaps that I have considerably more information about griffins than Wasgos, and that indeed I have considerably more information about Western monsters than non-Western. This is partially because many of the non-Western monsters are from the oral tradition and hence not as well preserved, but certainly it is much more because of our old pal racism. There are at least 100 pages of books in the English language on European monsters for every single page on any non-European ones, and possibly by a greater ratio by orders of magnitude. And this is not only a crime for simple ethical reasons, but because non-Western monsters are so great, you guys, an ocean of triumphs of the imagination, and it is insane that we don't get to hear about them because they're going to steal our jobs or whatever. I hope I have demonstrated this general principle already, and there's more to come. For instance, don't we all need to know more about the winner in the giant flying vampire snake category? The Chilean pihuachenye. We know it's spoken of by the Mapuche people, and that it flies around at night, sucking people's blood, and yes, that is enough. That is wonderful. But more stories have been told and we don't get to hear them? Of course, some creatures really are actually quite simple. The winner in the category of non-human deity figures comes from the 4th century BCE Chinese bestiary, the Shanhai Jing, or the Classic of Mountains and Seas. This is a tour of an imaginary mountain range with various creatures in it. And it tells us of the minor deity Dijong, who would later appear as Morris in Shang-Chi, and in the original source, we are told, there is a god here whose form resembles a yellow sack with a red aura like cinnabar. He has 6 legs and 4 wings and exists in a state of confusion. Me too, Dijong. Me too. The winner in the category of lake monsters is the good old-fashioned Loch Ness Monster. One of the big stars of cryptozoology, which is of course the study of animals that people have sightings of but science does not accept as real. I have a lot of sympathy for cryptozoology, or at least for the desire for glorious ape men and sea monsters and such to be real, but continually avoiding humanity's omniscient gaze. But in an age where almost everyone in the West, anyway, carries a video camera in their pocket at all times, every day that good proof doesn't come in is more bad news for cryptozoology. Nevertheless, there may yet be something to the Loch Ness Monster. Loch Ness, in fact, contains eels of the species called European eels, to be exact. And the thing about European eels is that they spend most of their lives in European freshwater, but they actually travel to the Caribbean to breed, as do so many of us. I don't know about you. Then the baby eels, which are called elvers, by the way, which is amazing. It sounds like someone who hunts and traps elves. Maybe that's why they're called that. Maybe that's what they do. They then migrate back to Europe and live out their lives until they themselves reach sexual maturity and head back to the Caribbean. But the thing is, it has been observed that for whatever reason, every so often an eel in Europe will not develop out of its own adolescence. We all know the type. Some 50-year-old men have a lot to say about the Loch Ness Monster. But with the eels, lack of puberty means the migratory instinct doesn't kick in, and so all of their friends and relations swim out to sea, and they stay behind, alone with no competition. Imagine if everybody you knew as a kid who grew up and got a real job and stopped thinking about Spider-Man all moved to another country. You would be a queen or a king or other royalty. It's so beautiful. So, give me some time, a bit of room, and little competition for resources to an eel, and well, it does happen to be a fact that occasionally a 20-foot-long eel is fished out of a European river. In fact, historically, thin-lipped, humorless Loch Ness Monster skeptics have said things like, there's no such thing as the Loch Ness Monster, it's just a giant eel. To which I say, may I see this giant eel? I mean, yes, it's too bad that the monster isn't a plesiosaur. Indeed, it's too bad that everything isn't plesiosaurs. But a huge, enormous eel is still pretty all right as monsters go. All that is left, in my opinion, is for me to catch it and ride it like a horse. The winner in the hairy cryptozoology wildman competition has a hell of a competition to beat. Sasquatch-type creatures are seen all over the planet. There's the Ohio grassman, the Yeti, of course, the Yowie in Australia, the Central African Kakundakari, the list goes on. It is an embarrassment of riches. Sasquatches are so ubiquitous, yet so invisible, that to some this suggests that this must be a folkloric phenomenon, a basic human tendency to invent and believe in wild men. Their universality doesn't prove their non-existence, certainly, but if your 5-year-old believes in Santa Claus, okay, fine, but if they believe in tens of thousands of Santa Clauses, their sleighs blotting out the whole sky, then maybe you should have a little talk, is all. We're going to give the award to Florida's skunk ape, though. Mainly because there's some pictures of it that are the best pictures of any such creature, both in realism and design. I love how shaggy it is and how it resembles an ape rather than a humanoid. Said to live in Florida swamps and to give off a terrible smell, hence the name, it is truly remarkable that where Florida is concerned, we have come to a time in history where the term skunk ape sounds like more appealing company than Florida man. Taking cryptozoology as a general category, the medal goes to the thylacine, also known as the Tasmanian tiger or the Tasmanian wolf. Now, it may be difficult to imagine an animal that can just as easily be described as a tiger or a wolf. Perhaps other names for the thylacine could include the Tasmanian bear, the Tasmanian stegosaurus, and the Tasmanian Formula One race car. But what the thylacine looks like is this. So wolf, guys. Wolf, come on. Where does tiger even come from? Well, it comes from the fact that thylacines are yellow with black stripes, and that Tasmania is not very interesting, and they have to spice things up as best they can. That's right, Tasmania. I said it. The thylacine is around coyote-sized and is a top predator, eating kangaroos and emus and stuff like that. Its remarkable features include a mouth that can open very wide indeed, and a long tail that can be used as a counterbalance when it stood up and hopped on its rear legs like a kangaroo, which it did to escape danger and for satirizing kangaroos. Again, there's not much to do in Tasmania. Other than these traits, the thylacine was remarkably similar to a canine, so much so, in fact, that the skull of a thylacine can be reliably told from the skull of a wolf only by the presence of 2 specific holes on the palate. But of course, thylacines are not canines, not at all. They are marsupials, more closely related to wombats, koalas, and quokkas than to canines. And conversely, wolves are more closely related to whales or bats or humans than they are to thylacines. The similarity of the wolves and the thylacines is due to a principle called convergent evolution. Put in the simplest way possible, convergent evolution is when animals evolving to fill the same ecological niches develop the same traits. Thylacines and canines are an extreme example, but penguins and puffins are semi-aquatic cold-weather birds with distinctive black and white markings, and lobsters and dogs will both cut you. This is nature. It's an utterly fascinating phenomenon, or would be if evolution was real. Luckily, as Kirk Cameron has proven, the fact that bananas are convenient to eat proves that the first book of Genesis is factually true, and I am not kidding. He has attempted to prove it this way. Look at it, yeah. Kirk Cameron banana, and enjoy the rest of your life. I've actually done something wrong here in discussing the thylacine, which is to use the present tense. For you see, the thylacine is extinct. The last one appears to have died in the Hobart Zoo in 1936. But they're still often sighted in Tasmania and southern Australia, which many feel is a manifestation of a sort of collective guilt. No, we didn't kill all of them. We're not that bad. And of course, it is possible that they're still alive in numbers so small that their extinction in a few generations is biologically inevitable, so great, terrific, nothing to worry about. And it's also possible that these sightings are of vengeful thylacine wraiths who haven't gotten around to figuring out what form their vengeance is going to take exactly just yet. And I do wish they would get on the stick, because I need Tasmania to be overrun by undead thylacines yesterday. That'd cure the boredom. Our next event is speculative evolution. In 1982, the paleontologist Dale Russell unveiled the Dinosauroid, proposing this as a Stenonychosaurus dinosaur evolved into human-like sentience if the dinosaurs hadn't gone extinct. It is not terribly well regarded in scientific circles. There's really no good reason for a dinosaur to evolve in upright posture, since they have their tails as counterbalances already. They often already have their hands free. But it does have a cool, weird space alien vibe, and that is, of course, extremely important. Also, Dale Russell is Canadian, proving that, yes, monsters can be created, even by Canadians. The winner among all the vampires of the world is Morbius from the movie. Ha ha! No, just kidding. Down south around Florida, the Seminole people spoke of the Scatene, who were ordinary people by day, but by night would remove their internal organs through their mouth and hang them over a tree limb. I'm with you so far. Then the rest of the body would shrivel up and turn into an owl. Fine. And then that owl would fly forth to drink human blood. If it was really giving 110%, it would go ahead and draw out its victim's heart through the mouth. And you guys, I once again don't know why there aren't 20 movies about these. The Lycanthrope category goes to the Chichewa werehyenas of southern Africa. Now, many shapeshifters have giveaways in their human forms. The werewolves sometimes have unibrows. The Japanese kitsune fox shifters sometimes keep their tails, for example. The Chichewas, however, had a clue of another order entirely. On top of the Chichewa's head was a snout sticking upward. Extremely bizarre, to be sure, but also easily enough covered up with a hat or the right hairstyle. But this wasn't the end of it. This was also the Chichewa's actual mouth, and though they could speak through the human mouth, they couldn't eat with it. And it gets weirder. When they would take their hyena form, this mouth on the top of the head would become the actual snout, and the whole human face would shrink and shrivel up and still be vaguely visible on the throat of the hyena. I love this stuff so much. Another global archetype is the hag, the hideous old woman as actual monster. And the greatest of these is certainly Baba Yaga. Oh, I thought this picture wouldn't come up. There's the face on the... I drew that. Here we have Baba Yaga, the famous witch of Russian folklore. Now, if she were just a witch, she would not be included here, because witch is just a human with a job. But Baba Yaga does count as a monster because in her very large number of stories, inhumanity does crop up quite often. For a witch, such as she, who has supernatural powers in any case, Baba Yaga could heal and kill and control animals and shape change and turn other people into frogs or birds and tell the future and always shake exactly 2 pills out of aspirin bottles and other powers besides. Monstrosity is defined for her by 4. And Baba Yaga, well, sometimes she was just an old woman, but sometimes her teeth were knives or made of stone. Sometimes her nose was blue and impossibly long. Sometimes her body was huge, but her legs were thin and weak, which Mike Mignola expressed as wooden legs when she showed up in Hellboy, and that was the best. And sometimes she was gigantic, so huge that if she lay down in her house, she stretched from one end of it to the other, her nose grazing the ceiling, and sometimes so huge that people would just walk into her open mouth, thinking it a cave, which is certainly just real big, but also maybe pay attention to your surroundings, kids. And it was kids who needed to pay attention. Baba Yaga was the archetypal old woman in the forest who eats little children. I always liked Baba Yaga as a kid, mainly because of her vehicles, though. She flies around in a giant mortar and pestle, which is awesome, though I do remember as a kid thinking, oh, sure, a mortar and pestle. And then, of course, there's the famous chicken-legged house. I mean, that's great. Look how great that is. In this housing market, forget about it, but still. There's this whole thing where modern UFO writers with especially poor critical thinking skills attribute the stories and achievements of ancient people, mostly ancient non-white people, to ancient space alien super technology, and this, of course, is bunk, but it's fun to think of Baba Yaga's fleet as an example of this. The mortar and pestle, some sort of bowl-shaped hover vehicle controlled by a huge joystick, and the house, an Imperial ATST. Round of applause for Baba Yaga. I love this convention. Now, the other really great thing about Baba Yaga is that much as her stories obviously vary widely, she is almost always minding her own business at the beginning of them. She is a grandma who lives in the woods, and then people try to sneak into her house and take her food or her magical horses or something, and she friggin' defends herself. That's all. These are not tales of heroes, these are stories with the simple moral of maybe don't mess with Baba Yaga. A good moral for any story. Bridgerton, you name it. Taking home the gold in the giant event is a local boy, Paul Bunyan. He is not a member of a species of giant. He is not a hill giant or a frost giant or a cheese giant. He is simply a man born of normal humans who grew enormously big. This is rarely explained. Some stories attribute it to astrological concerns, that he was born under the star Canopus or under a comet in the northern sky, which would, of course, explain why every single person on Earth born around that time also turned into a colossus. But most stories dispense with this sort of thing and merely inform us that he grew at a prodigious rate, wearing his father's clothes by a week in age and using a lumber wagon as a baby carriage, that sort of thing. He ate 40 bowls of porridge to whet his appetite. Parenting is a very hard job, but imagine if your child were in fact a serious and profound drain on local resources. His height varies from telling to telling. Sometimes he's just a big, robust man, fully 7 feet tall, but that's boring and I hate it. And happily, he is more often much, much bigger. In one story, a long series of mathematical gymnastics in the story puts his height at 154 feet. In another very popular story, his footprints created Minnesota's 10,000 lakes, which means that he would be quite a lot of actual miles tall, and that his feet would be extremely strangely shaped. And our final category of the night is the general undead category. And this one goes to Bakog, one of the best monsters in any legend anywhere. The story of Bakog is another local one. He started off as an Ojibwe man who desired his brother's wife, Biwun. He therefore murdered his brother, which sounds like business as usual for Western legends, but in fact is relatively uncommon in Ojibwe stories. Murder is, of course, regarded as wrong in pretty much every functional culture. The culture that decides that all murder is A-OK is generally going to last like 6 months. But then, nevertheless, Western stories are filled to the very brim with heroes committing countless acts of murder and being celebrated for it. Not so for the Ojibwe. Murder is wronger even than it is in the West, which is, of course, a pretty good way of thinking of things. Even their most storied culture hero, Wayna Bojo, also known as Nana Bojo, is a trickster and a lucky fool, more human and kind-hearted than the warrior archetype revered elsewhere. And so it was for our man Bakog. Upon completing in secret his heinous deed, he was immediately rejected by Biwun, who then took her own life, and then came to Bakog as a ghost as he was out in his canoe one night, frightening him into drowning. And then one of two things happened. In one version, his bones were scattered and washed up on shore at random, and then he persuaded some passers-by, speaking through his skull, to reassemble his skeleton, because when you find a skull and it asks you to do things, just do them. Still, this accomplished, he is still not permitted to go into the afterlife because of his terrible deed, and so he spent the rest of eternity flying through the sky, doomed to eternal unrest. And so, when you see a skeleton flying through the sky, that's why. Which I guess is better than not knowing why. In another version, he kept to Earth after his death. In this story, he kept his flesh, but it became transparent, and he appears therefore to be a walking skeleton. And you can also hear his bones creak when he walks. He roams the deep woods, looking to come upon a person who has wandered off into the forest alone. These he shoots with invisible arrows, and these arrows put their victim into a deep sleep. Bakog then approaches the sleeping person and carefully cuts them open and removes their liver, replacing it with a liver-shaped rock. He then sews his victims invisibly back up and goes off to eat the liver. The luckless person wakes up and returns home, but then slowly wastes away, eventually dying of what Western doctors would call having a rock for a liver. This is obviously a cautionary tale about not going into the woods alone, which is a good thing to avoid even in Bakog-free woods. It is also most likely an explanation for such maladies as cause calcification of the liver. I Googled liver calcification, confirmed that it is in fact a thing, and immediately became too terrified to read on. But in any case, it's an amazing story. Western undead just drink your blood by brooding sensually or eat your brains while shambling or later sprinting. Bakog performs a surgical procedure on your liver, and that is wonderful. That is imagination. And all of this has been about a celebration of the imagination and the extraordinary forms it has taken throughout history and culture all around the world. But we have ended on two Minnesota monsters because, of course, we all know in our hearts that the best people in the world are Minnesotans for some reason. Thank you. Thank you all so much. I hope you're having a wonderful con. I certainly am myself. There will be a meet and greet for me because I'm extremely famous. At wherever the meet and greets are tomorrow at 12:30. So come by and say hi and tell me some monster stories and come and hang out. I will also be going around in my cosplay after that tomorrow. Which is of my mascot character. Thank you so much.
Are you in Fringe shows?
Yeah, I'm in Fringe. I'm in all sorts of shows. Someone's asking if I'm in any Fringe shows. Yes, I'm doing a show for the Minnesota Fringe. I also have first Thursdays at Bryant Lake Bowl where I do monster science shows. I did not do one yesterday because I was here. And instead, I'm doing the second Thursday, and that'll be about the history of monsters and art. And it's going to be really super cool. Yeah, look me up. Reverend Matt's Monster Science. I'm on the basic social media for 50-year-olds, and there's a website and a Patreon and all that sort of thing. So keep up. I do this all the time. So thank you all so much, and have a wonderful night.